It's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's special event. Our Vecinos or Neighbors Lecture Series is a key part of the Institute's Latin America initiative. Since its inauguration in 2008, the series has addressed some of the most important issues confronting Latin America, and tonight is certainly no different. Next year, Venezuela will elect a new president. The results of the election will have major consequences for the future of Venezuelan democracy. Despite his battle with cancer, President Hugo Chavez is running for a third term, and clearly he will be the key player. The main opposition candidate is Enrique Capriles. Have I pronounced that correctly? Pretty close? Okay. A 39-year-old state governor who is emerging as the greatest challenge to President Chavez's hold on power. Furthermore, it is increasingly evident that the results of the election could significantly impact Venezuela's ties with the United States. In the last decade, United States-Venezuelan relations have experienced serious tensions, as we all know. Yet, improving bilateral ties is obviously in the interest of both countries. Energy is one reason among many. Venezuela is not only a very important player in the global energy market, but also the fourth largest supplier of oil to the United States. This past July, OPEC estimated that including heavy oil, Venezuela's oil reserves exceed those of Saudi Arabia. That's a rather remarkable factoid, and I still can't believe it. But if you believe the Wall Street Journal, which is the source of this, it reported on July 18th that according to OPEC, Venezuela's proven crude reserves reached 296.5 billion barrels in 2010, up 40% from a year earlier, and higher than Saudi Arabia's 264.5 billion barrels. This evening, our panelists will discuss these and other important issues affecting the future of Venezuela. We are fortunate to have four distinguished scholars from Venezuela to address them. In September, the Baker Institute announced the appointment of former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson as our senior fellow for Latin America. The appointment highlights the importance the Institute attaches to our Latin America initiative, which you'll be hearing much more about later as we evolve this initiative. And tonight's panel reflects our ongoing effort to bring the best scholarly minds to bear on this critical region. So I now would like to turn the podium over to our moderator, Dr. Mark Jones, Baker Institute Fellow and a Professor of Political Science here at Rice University, and is one of our closest collaborators on our Latin America initiative. Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Master. Well, next year, Venezuela is going to have what could be a transcendental election for both the country as well as the region. As we've all seen over the past decade with Hugo Chavez's rule, what happens in Venezuela extends far beyond its borders to influence politics throughout the region, be it from Buenos Aires to Managua and beyond. So it's an election that is of great interest both to those of us concerned with Venezuela, but also to all of those of us concerned with Latin America more generally. And here in Houston, concerned with, say, with Citgo. So we have the real fortune to have three of the leading scholars on a variety of Venezuelan political issues, ranging from politics to economics and oil and politics to foreign relations, with us today. So this is a real pleasure and a real honor to have you all with us. We have José Enrique Molina Vega from the Instituto de Estudios Públicos y Derecho Público in the Universidad de Zulia, who I first learned about Venezuelan politics when I was in graduate school back in the early 90s. The required reading for anyone wanting to know about elections and politics in Venezuela in that era was José Enrique, and it still is today. We also have with us Francisco Monalde, Director of the Center for Energy and the Environment at the Instituto de Estudios Superiores de Administración in Caracas, a friend of the Baker Institute, who works with us quite frequently on oil issues, and clearly oil and politics in Venezuela are intricately intertwined. And we also have with us Carlos Romero, Professor Emeritus of International Relations and Foreign Policy at the Instituto de Estudios Políticos at the Universidad Central de Venezuela, one of the leading experts on Venezuelan foreign relations. So we have a great group here whose topics are both separate in terms of politics, oil and politics, and international relations, but also very much intermixed because it's really tough to talk about any of these topics separately. So looking forward to 3 great presentations that provide excellence on their own and then overlap to provide us with a complete picture of where Venezuela is today and where it's going over the next year. So thank you. I'd like to start things off in order of the program with Jose Enrique Molina Vega. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks very much. Well, I would like to thank the Latin American initiative of the James Baker Institute for this opportunity to be here and to talk with you about Venezuelan elections. What I am going to do is to divide the presentation in 2 parts. First of all, I would like to talk about the perspective for the elections, and then the perspective for the country after the elections, depending on the results. The first point, I think, about the election, to understand the setting of this election, is to look at the electoral trend for the last elections in Venezuela, starting in the 2006 elections. As you can see, if we take these national elections, the trend, one could say, is for the opposition and the government to level their forces. By 2006, which was the peak for the government strength, they got 63% in the presidential election of that year. Then came down to 48% in 2010, barring in the middle. And for the opposition, we have the opposite trend, going from 37% in 2006 to around 50% for the parties that today integrate the opposition to the government. So what I would like to stress here is that at this moment, the gap that existed, the electoral gap between the opposition and the government, seems to have been closed. So both of them seems to have a similar strength. There is no an inbuilt advantage now going into this election. The government, as you could see from this table, gets advantage when there is a high turnout. The highest level of turnout seems to favor the government along this election, but it's not really very much. One really can say that they are very close one to the other regarding their structural vote. Second, if we see the opinion polls, the tendency is also similar regarding government approval, where when people is asked whether they think that the government is doing well or bad, if they think the government is doing a good job or not, the tendency of government approval has been to decline and reaching a level below 50% during the first half of this year. This tendency apparently has been reverted during the last 2 months after the illness of the president was announced and after a new program, a new grand housing program have been presented by the government, the new social policy of the government, which is also at this moment is just a project, but a project in which 2 million people have been registered to get a house, and the government have started a massive building program, housing building program, that they expect to give them a similar result that the one they got in 2003 and 2004 from the social programs of that time. But it's not clear to what extent this increase in support for the government or increase in government approval is going really to last, or is just a momentary one at this point. Regarding the vote intention for Hugo Chavez vis-a-vis an opposition candidate, an unknown opposition candidate at this moment, the pattern is fairly similar. The polls tend to register at this moment what one could call a technical tie between Chavez and an opposition candidate, with a tendency in the last few weeks for the government to improve for the same reasons that we said about government approval, but being unclear at this point to what extent that improvement is going to last, particularly if we regard other factors that we're going to talk about. Well, we didn't see this slide. Then we move to the electorate. I think it's important, besides looking at the electoral and the survey's tendency, to look at the composition of the Venezuelan electorate. Because what we get here when we ask about party identification, the extent to which the electorate is identified with government parties or opposition parties, or when we ask about political attitudes toward Chavez and his government, pro-Chavez, against Chavez, or neither of the two, what we get, as you can see here, is that at least a third of the Venezuelan electorate can be regarded as independent. The independents are the part of the electorate that political science would expect to switch the vote regarding their evaluation of the government, regarding the issues or the candidates of the election. Is quite a relevant part of the electorate that one can say could switch from one part of the other regarding or influenced by the circumstances of the election, by the electoral campaign, by the way the economy is doing, particularly by the evaluation of the government. So at this point in time, whether we look at the electoral trend, the opinion polls, or the composition of the electorate, the conclusion that we can reach is that the result of the 2012 election is open at this time. The final result would depend the way the campaign goes, the way the economy goes, the way in which the government is able or not to fulfill their goals, to satisfy the expectations of the public, and of course, the way in which the opposition is able or not to present its case to the public. In this setting, the government has some advantages as well as the opposition. What I regard the government advantages going into the 2012 elections are, first of all, the increase in the oil revenues, because as one can expect, this money will be used to put forward programs that would give direct money to the part of the electorate that the government may regard as possible targets and people that could respond with their vote to those social programs. They did that in 2003 and 2004 successfully, and I think they are trying to repeat the same performance. In particularly, they have put a lot of their hopes in this new housing program, Misión Vivienda, by which they have promised to build 2 million houses, and they have registered about 2 million of people that is asking for their homes, and they have started a massive building program. The government is very inefficient. Many people do not believe that the government would be able to fulfill these goals, but in any case, if they are able to to make this program, to set up this program, to start this program, to put it in the move, probably they will get some results, because it's one of the main needs of the population in the case of Venezuela. The other point that is working for the government at this moment is public support concerning the president's health. The president has been able to use his situation to gather support, to get public support for him. But one could expect this to backfire. Is going into the elections, the president is perceived, Chavez is perceived as unfit to govern, and the people start to think that he's just going into the election to hand over power to somebody else, to somebody unknown. If the opposition is able to create that kind of perception, probably the health situation of the president would backfire against the government and could be an asset for the opposition. The other very big advantage for the government at this point in Venezuela is the weakness of the institutions. The institutions that are there for controlling the president are all under president control. So there is no way to hinder the abuse of power by the government. The government, as it has done in the past elections, will again use public resources to enhance their electoral chances. I think it is enough to tell you, and probably you already know, that government uses public media, the public television network and the public radio network, which are very powerful. They use them as if they were party networks, and they as party instruments. They are all the time broadcasting government propaganda and party propaganda, and they will carry on doing that. There is no way to stop this to happen, and that is an important advantage for the government. As for the opposition, it also has important advantages, important assets for fighting this election. First of all, the opposition have been able to unite behind a political program and behind a presidential candidate. At least that is what is established by now. The opposition will hold open primaries on February 12, 2012 to elect the presidential candidate. And that is important even beyond the fact that the opposition is going to compete united with a group of parties that goes beyond what they have been able to assemble together for the previous election. But the other important point here is that from now on, at least it has been happening since about, several weeks before, and until February 12th, the focus of the country, will be on the opposition and on the opposition primaries. The government is not holding primaries. They have already established their candidate without any kind of election, any kind of process, because they have a unitary and a supreme leadership in Chavez. But the opposition is holding primaries, and the focus of the public is now on the opposition, and that, I think, is an important advantage. The candidate, if all goes well, will be strengthened by this process. And also, the Venezuelan electorate will be able to get acquainted with the opposition project, with program, and with the person that will lead the opposition into the 2012 elections. Besides that, another important aspect of the opposition, not decisive, but very important, is that public opinion seems to be against the overall political project of the government, and in that sense, in favor of the political project of the opposition, at least in the most gross lines of this project. When people is asked about their preferred government system, this is a survey done in February 2011 by one of the leading surveys companies in Venezuela. When people is asked what is their preferred government system, 21st century socialism as put forward by Chavez and the government, or social democracy, that could be said to be the leading thrust of the opposition program, and is expressly the title given to the project of the main opposition party. When people is asked to decide among these two, 55% is for social democracy and only 35% for 21st century socialism. And this is a constant since several years ago. There is not a majority support for 21st century socialism in any way it is asked. I mean, directly, as in this question, 21st century socialism against social democracy, or asking about support for a Cuban model of government, etc. Any way you ask, you get that there is not a majority support for the political project, the overall political project of the government. And when you ask about property, about the way the economy should be said or conduct, you get the same answer. I mean, this is a question about the preferred type of property. People was asked whether they prefer social communal property as put forward by Chavez. It was asked that way, or private property, and you got those results. And those are similar when you ask this same question in different ways. So there is no support for the radical socialism that the government has said to be their main project. In the same way, government performance regarding what the people perceive as the main problems of the country is not supported. There is a high level of discontent with the way the government is handling crime, unemployment, inflation, public services, particularly power supply, which has been in crisis since about 2 years now. So these all work, of course, for the advantage of the opposition if they are able to use this situation for their advantage. But people will not decide only on the overall project on socialism or social democracy or private property against communal property. People much more likely to decide their vote on the basis of government evaluation regarding whether the government is seen to be improving the lot of most of the population or not. And in that sense, whether the government is able to succeed in its new social programs, particularly the housing mission, will be a key for this next election. With this setting, with this situation that we have described, I would conclude, as I said before, that the result of the 2012 election by now is open. It will depend on campaign effectiveness by both parties, government and opposition, on government performance, and of course on Chavez's health and the way it is perceived by the population during the electoral campaign. After the election, if Chavez participates and wins, if the president can compete as it looks like and wins the election, I would expect a radicalization of socialist economic policy, as he has already said he will do it during the next 6 years. So more nationalizations, more control, state control of the economy, at least up to the point that this will be tenable, because one could expect that at one point in time, nationalization of the economy will become untenable, the economy will carry on deteriorating to a point that this kind of policy will not be possible anymore. But for the moment, the perspective is for a radicalization of the socialist economic program, an increased centralization of power and concentration of power in the hands of the president. And if the president turns out to be unfit to govern because of the health problems, there will be clearly a situation of political instability, because there is no a leader within the government ranks that will be able to keep the government coalition together, working in the same direction, or to carry on having the kind of public support that the president has had until now. So the health situation of the president is also a factor in whether there will be or not political social stability in Venezuela if the current president is able to participate and win the next election. Okay. If the opposition wins, what I would expect is a slow and negotiated transition. Slow and negotiated transition because the president, in the case of an opposition victory, will not have control of the parliament. He will need to negotiate with a parliament in which there is a PSUV Chavista majority at the moment, and that will remain, and it will remain in that way at least till 2015, unless the president is able to build up a new coalition that takes in some part of current Chavez's support. So it will have to be a negotiated transition, because even in the perspective that the new president uses the same instrument that Chavez used in 1999, a constitutional assembly that now is establishing the constitution, the new president could call for a new constitutional assembly. Probably that is not a wise thing to do, because we'll put a government early in time in a very, very strong confrontation with what will then be the opposition. Probably the way that will be choose will be the one of negotiation and transition, trying to increase the strength of what is now the opposition, weaken the forces of the Chavismo, and in that way be able to put forward and to go on with the program of whoever is the presidential candidate of the opposition. And this would be a transition towards decentralization of power, strengthening governors and mayors, towards a market economy with investment, employment, and welfare as the main concerns, and also a transition towards the reinstitutionalization of the country. This is the panorama that I envisage after 2012, whether the government wins or the opposition wins. And I said at this moment it's very difficult really to bet on who is going to win that election, Chavez or the opposition candidate. The election is quite open and will depend on what the actors do during this year that we will still have till October 7, which is the date of the presidential election in Venezuela. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jose Enrique. I'd like to turn the podium over to Dr. Minalde for presidential oil and politics.
Thank you. Okay, so basically I will talk about oil and the impact of oil in politics in Venezuela. Rómulo Betancourt wrote more than a half a century ago a book called Venezuela, Política y Petróleo. I think oil comes before politics in importance in Venezuela, but pretty much more than a half a century after that, we still are basically a country in which only oil and politics matter, unfortunately. So I wanted to tell you about something that the director of the Baker Institute already mentioned, which is the amazing potential in terms of resources, of oil resources that Venezuela has, and in the current situation of the world oil markets, the historical opportunity that the country has for developing the oil industry. First of all, I think it's interesting to point out that the price of oil has been, as you all are well aware, pretty high. In fact, during 2011, the average price of the Venezuelan basket has been at its highest point in history, in real terms. That's including the year 2008, in which we had the highest price, but we also had a very significant drop at the end of the year. So on average, in 2008, we had a lower level of oil pricing than 2011. So we have had since about 2003 a very significant increase in the price of oil that has benefit very significantly the Chavez presidency, as Jose Enrique Molina said. The Venezuelan basket last week was at 109, and as I said, the average has been $100 during this year. The most forecasts, even though we have very significant uncertainties in the world economy, especially in the European situation for the next year, still most analysts believe that the price of oil will keep at levels relatively high. And particularly in the medium term, sort of looking at that decade or the whole decade, the average that most analysts predict is higher than what we have today. Of course, as you know, the predicting the price of oil is a very risky business. I mean, in the past, most people have made big mistakes on that area, but I think it's important to keep that in mind. So the other issue is the proven reserves of Venezuela. Venezuela has today official proven reserves of about 297 billion barrels of oil. And that uses, first of all, it's important to notice, as you can see, that there has been a significant increase in the reserves very recently. But it's important to understand that we have not discovered any oil in the last decade. What has happened basically is that the oil that we already knew for, almost 4 decades that was down there in the Orinoco Belt has been incorporated into proven reserves. And the government did an independent audit process with Ryder Scott, which is a respected company actually based here in Houston, although they didn't use the Houston office, but the Calgary office, because Houston is in the empire. But basically what this company said is confirm the amount of oil that it's down there. But the big point is that this extra heavy oil has very low recovery rates. We haven't gotten more than 10% recovery of the oil in place of extra heavy oil in Venezuela. And the government is using 20% as the recovery rate. So as a result, you get this figure for oil reserves that is not particularly conservative. It's not. Probably it wouldn't pass the test of the Security and Exchange Commission as a level of reserves. Regardless of that, it's important to notice that even with 10% recovery rate, you could get a figure of about 190 billion barrels of oil, which would be the second largest reserves in the world. Even though we have a low quality oil compared to the Saudi Arabian oil, it is a really significant magnitude. Moreover, the U.S. Geological Survey a few months ago published a report saying that they believe that the ultimately recoverable reserves from the Orinoco Belt are actually 510 billion barrels, which would be twice the amount of reserves of Saudi Arabia. Of course, this is not proven reserves. We are talking here about ultimately recoverable resources. But just to give you an idea of comparing the Venezuelan reserves using the official figures with other countries and other regions, let's have a look. Venezuela has, as some of you know, Colombia has had a very significant increase in oil production in the last few years, a very significant investment, in part led by some Venezuelans. But Colombia has not discovered any significant reserves. So Venezuela has more than 200 times the reserves of Colombia, more than about 23 times the reserves of Brazil, 3 times or 4 times the reserves of Russia, 2.5 times the reserves of Iraq, 2 times the reserves of Iran, and you can keep going down and seeing that the amount of reserves of Venezuela are really huge. 92% of the reserves of South America, including, of course, Brazil, and 89% of the reserves of Latin America, and 75% of the reserves of the Western Hemisphere, including the U.S. 20% of the reserves of OPEC and 20% of the world. That means about 300 years of Venezuelan current production and 1,250 years of current domestic market. So for all public policy purposes, the reserves of the Orinoco Belt are infinite. We will not get that oil out of the ground before there are significant substitutes for oil. Moreover, if we compare Venezuelan extraction rates, the extraction rate is production as a proportion of the total reserves, we can see that Venezuela has a very low level of extraction rate compared to other leading oil producers. If Venezuela had an extraction rate similar to Iran, which is, by the way, a very poorly managed oil industry, Venezuela would have a production of 7.5 million barrels per day instead of the 2.7 that it has today, so about 3 times. As if we had the extraction rate of Saudi Arabia, we'd have close to 10 million barrels per day. And if we had the extraction rate of Russia, we would have a production of 30 million barrels per day, which of course is a crazy number. But that only points to the fact that Venezuela could sustain a much higher significant rate of extraction and a significant rate of production. So not only do we have this amazing resource base, but we have the potential of new projects in the Orinoco Belt. By the way, I'm not talking about conventional oil, in which there are also significant opportunities, but of course much less resources. We have the clear opportunity of increased production for more than 1.5 million barrels and 100 billion in investment. As many of you know, there are many announcements in Venezuela of different projects, but very few are actual serious projects. But to some extent, these projects are seriously being studied and pursued by these companies. As you can see, there are 6 major projects in the future of the Orinoco Belt, being in the stage of final discussion. And these, as I will mention, they have been delayed, and they are not necessarily all going to happen, but they could happen if the conditions are right. As you can see, there are companies like Chevron, Repsol, Eni of Italy, the Russian consortium, and CNPC from China involved. So this is the potential. Let's talk now about the reality of what's happening. First of all, early production in these projects has not yet started as was supposed to be started last year, and it's improbable that it will start in 2012 as the government has announced. In the first stage, actually, because of lack of infrastructure, the plan is only to take out about 50,000 barrels by truck. Venezuela has bought about 40, and apparently more are coming trucks from China. And that, I mean, that's a very disruptive process, and you cannot scale it up very significantly. So there are serious problems developing the necessary infrastructure. The location of the new upgraders plan is not economical, and I think it will be eventually probably changed. There are negotiations are ongoing, but things are not still quite finished. And one of the problems is that before because the oil in the Orinoco Belt is a very low quality, 8-grade API, and in order to get it to the markets, you need two things: either to upgrade it to a better quality oil, as the current project of the Orinoco Belt do, or second of all, mixing it with a lighter oil to export it. The thing is that we don't have that much lighter oil in order to mix it. So the expectation that this early production will rise up to about 600,000 barrels, as the government says, is very difficult with the current situation. The fiscal framework is not attractive at this point, and the companies have openly said it. In particularly, the new version approved this year of the new windfall tax is not at all attractive. The government has said that new investments will not pay that tax until they recover the investment, but that's a big question mark. So the firms are willing to invest if the fiscal framework is adjusted. The infrastructure construction conditions are well defined, and operational control by the companies is effective. And the other issue is that PDVSA has to finance about 60% of these projects. And so where is PDVSA going to find more than $70 billion to do these projects is a big question mark. The other big issue is the problem of credibility. This is a survey by the Fraser Institute among oil companies in the world, and it ranks jurisdictions. As you can see, Texas is the 5th jurisdiction in the world in terms of attractiveness to invest. Venezuela is the last of the 136 jurisdictions studied. So even though we have this huge base of reserves, the credibility of the institutions in Venezuela are pretty low. And so that's something that the government has to overcome. The other big issue is that the Venezuelan oil industry is in big trouble. As you can see here, we have had a declining oil production tendency for the last about 14 years, since about even before this graphic from about 97. And most of this decline is attributable to lack of investment. In fact, as you can see, the blue line is the number of active oil rigs, and that number has not been able to increase. In fact, very recently it has declined again. And in order to increase production, we need, sort of a rule of thumb, more than 100 active rigs, and we have about 68. So the problem is lack of investment. Why there is lack of investment? There are many reasons, but the main reason is that the government extracts more money from PDVSA than the company can bear. Moreover, the company is increasing dramatically its debt from about $3 billion in 2006 to more than today. This is the last official figure, 25 billion, but today we know it's around 30 billion. And if you add to that the accounts payable of at least 7 billion plus the arbitrations from Conoco and Exxon that could increase to between 10 and 15 billion, I mean, PDVSA still doesn't have a debt ratio that is unmanageable. It's lower than, say, Pemex or Petrobras, but the tendency is it's terrible. I mean, we haven't and you can see it from the red bars that investment has been declining. So where is the money from this increase in debt going? Basically to the government. So PDVSA gets in debt to pay for the government programs. Moreover, the net oil exports of Venezuela, not only production has been declining, but the net oil exports of Venezuela have declined much more dramatically, almost to half in this period. And this is because the domestic market, since you know gasoline is almost free in Venezuela, you can fill your tank for $1. So domestic consumption has increased, and we are since our refining capacity, unfortunately, is not being fully used, we are importing products for about more than 100,000 barrels per day. So in net, we are exporting about 1.7. If you include other liquids from oil different, it gets to about 2 million barrels. But these are comparable figures. So you have almost a decline into almost half of exports. Moreover, the exports to the country that pays us the better, like the U.S., have declined from 1.7, and these are official figures of PDVSA, so this is not my speculation. 1.7 to today, the official figure is less than 1 million barrels to the U.S., whereas to other places the exports have increased, including Cuba and others in Petrocaribe who do. I mean, half of Petrocaribe is paid, but the other half is not paid. Is actually in loans of 20 years, 1% interest, and they actually do not pay. And Cuba doesn't pay. And the domestic market, of course, we sell about a barrel of oil in Venezuela that costs about 120 of gasoline by $5 per barrel. And so only about 1.7 million barrels of oil per day are actually fully paid. So that's a big problem also. And in terms of oil, there are other issues. Of course, this tendency of production decline for 14 years is a very bad tendency. The excessive bureaucracy. PDVSA, before the oil strike, had 40,000 employees. Then it had 20, and now it has about 100,000 officially in the payroll and 14,000 additional in contracts. So and the production has declined. So the current the current production of PDVSA probably could be managed by 20,000 people. So we have 5 times as many employees as would be necessary for oil production. As I mentioned, the arbitrations will be a problem. The nationalization of service companies has had a very negative impact in production. And the other things I already mentioned, Venezuela the government is much more dependent on the price of oil than ever before. 95 to 96% of Venezuelan exports are oil at this point in time. We cannot export almost anything else but other natural resources. And the projects in the Orinoco Belt will take time to develop. So let me talk about 3 scenarios for the future in terms of the oil industry. The first scenario is the status quo, in which there are no changes in the current policy. Projects continue to fall behind the schedule, and only 1 or 2 of the projects in the Orinoco Belt are actually developed. Still, I believe that the tendency of oil production decline of Venezuela will be eventually reverted. And production will start increasing slowly during the next 6 years, even in the scenario that President Chavez and the status quo is maintained. But it's a slight increase to about 3.1 million barrels of production. This scenario could be much worse if the price of oil declines. If the price of oil declines, probably these projects won't happen, if it declines significantly. Then we have this scenario that is very unlikely, but it's important to keep in mind that it's possible, that could happen, which is an actual amazing oil boom in which there are not only policy changes, but there is a stability in the political and governance in Venezuela is reestablished. If that happens and the price of oil keeps high, as most people predict, there will be a bonanza of oil investment in Venezuela. Production could be increased, not as candidates in the opposition say to 6 million barrels in 5 years, which I think it's impossible, but maybe to 4.5, 4.7 million barrels. And if the prices of oil keep up, Venezuela will have the highest oil bonanza in history times 2. No? And they will imply investments of between 17 and 20 billion dollars per year, which is higher than what is happening in Brazil in the pre-salt. It will be one of the highest investment in oil in the world. And of course, in that scenario, the problem will be again that we hope that this time we will manage the oil wealth better than in the last 2 occasions that we had. And then we have the scenario 3, which is the most probable in case the opposition wins, in which there are policy changes, but there is no stability in the political arena. Governance is not totally established, and in that case, it's sort of an intermediate case in which there is an increase in oil production, but it's much lower than before. So, what are the implications of all these oil scenarios for the political situation? First, I believe that if President Chavez is healthy, he's likely to win. I agree completely, by the way, with the presentation that Jose Enrique Molina made. And I agree today that still it's open, the election. But the thing is that the president is going to spend money in this year like not even in 2004, not even in 2006. No, this will be the highest point of consumption per capita in the history of Venezuela, with a lot of problems, bottlenecks, scarcity of some goods, inflation, but I think plenty enough money to make for an increase in President Chavez's popularity if he's healthy. And if he has an approval rating of about 50% and a vote intention of about 40% now, it will be extremely hard to beat President Chavez under those circumstances. If he wins and oil prices keep high, as most people expect, I think he may endure in power, despite the worsening economic conditions that Jose Enrique mentioned. The economic model is a complete failure in Venezuela: high inflation, scarcity, declining supply of domestic goods. So this is not going to get us anywhere. But if there is plenty of fiscal resources in oil, political stability could be relatively bought with the oil dollars. The opposition might win if 2 things happen. First, it's united, which I think is very likely. I think the opposition primaries will be a success, and and there will be the candidate that wins will be supported by everybody in the opposition. And if that's the case, and President Chavez's health is not as good, so he either cannot campaign fully or is not the candidate, then I think the opposition has a significant chance of winning. Currently, as the director of the Baker Institute mentioned, the leading candidate is Enrique Capriles, who has a relatively significant advantage in most polls to Pablo Perez, who is the second. But at this point, I think it's possible that any of the three top candidates, and particularly the two, I mean, Pablo Perez and Enrique Capriles, stand a chance to win the primaries. If the opposition wins, and here I have a different opinion from some colleagues, we will have a very hard 2013 year because basically there will be no money in the government treasury. But the opportunity for a better situation afterwards is very significant, because there will be a very significant there could be a very significant change in the perception of investment attractiveness, and if the price of oil keep up, it's in a scenario that I think is less dramatic than some economists predict, that say that the opposition has to make a huge adjustment. I think that the 2013 will be a difficult year for, by the way, also to President Chavez if he's in power, because he will still not have money either. But will have had created huge expectations of bonanza that will not be accomplished. So there will be very difficult times for President Chavez still if he's in power. However, I think the opposition, even though it faces all the challenges that Jose Enrique mentioned, it doesn't control no other institution besides if it controls the presidency. It will be very, very hard. It will be a tough negotiation and with potential for very difficult governance issues. However, I believe that in that case, the next president could buy political support with good economic results and more effective social programs. And I think there is a chance, not a very significant chance, but there is a chance that the situation might turn around very dramatically in Venezuela. So we have to follow two key variables, of course. President Chavez's health, which is a mystery. As you know, there are all kinds of rumors, but I don't think anybody knows exactly what will happen. And the other thing is oil prices. In the medium run, that's a dramatically important variable for the Venezuelan economy and politics. In the very long run, despite all the great things that I said in terms of the potential of Venezuela in the oil industry, as you know, I mean, being a natural resource dependent country is very problematic in terms of the challenges that it puts into the economic management. And unfortunately, there are not many successful cases of managing this kind of resource wealth. And if Venezuela keeps depending on oil, it will be very hard to have a successful economy in the medium to long term. So I'm not particularly optimistic about the Venezuelan economy in the long run if we cannot accomplish a more diversified economy, which will be really tough because with all these resources, oil resources, it's hard to do anything else. However, I hope that in the medium term we face a better situation than many expect, and maybe we have another opportunity to use this time, the third time. You know, people say that la tercera va la vencida. Well, the third oil boom of Venezuela gets us somewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francisco. Now I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Carlos Romero.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about Venezuelan foreign policy and the role it plays in the presidential election processes. There will be two main candidates with different approaches to there will be two main candidates with different approaches to foreign policy matters. Hugo Chavez and the candidate of the unified opposition. If Hugo Chavez is related, his government will continue with current foreign policy. If the opposition candidate were to win, he or she will undertake another kind of foreign policy. Today, the chances of success of Venezuelan foreign policy are given in part by the international contexts as well as the national factors, the most important being the fact that it is the country with the largest oil reserves in the world. Likewise, the role that Petróleos de Venezuela, PDVSA, plays in the formulation and implementation of Venezuelan foreign policy needs to be highlighted. The changes of Venezuela foreign policy provide us with three important references. First of all, President Chavez's leadership. Secondly, the perception of a growing international and regional left progressive bloc, especially embodied in the Bolivarian Alliance for the People of our Americas, ALBA. And third, the growing politicization of Venezuela Foreign Service. From a geopolitical point of view, Venezuela has embarked on a foreign policy which has stated that one of its main objectives is the establishment of an anti-American alliance, defined as the means to reduce dependence of the U.S. and to promote a new global geopolitical map, a new global leadership. An important indicator is Venezuelan record of votes in several debates and resolutions in the United Nations. Between 1999 and 2002, Venezuela tried to use foreign policy to sustain the new regime and to support revolutionary movement in the world. Between 2002 and 2004, given the domestic circumstances, President Chavez's international activism slowed down. After the April 2002 coup against him and the 2002-2003 oil strike, he agreed to internal mediation by the Organization of American States, the Carter Center, the UNDP, and a group of government friends. In the 24th, Chavez's government returned to the international arena with a progressive radical outlook. Within this framework, Venezuela has done its best to keep its booming economy on track in spite of its huge internal and external debt, coupled with rising inflation and a national currency, the Bolivar, that has lost its value in recent years. The U.S. response to Venezuelan foreign policy is contradictory in terms of the international and external changes observed since Hugo Chávez's electoral victories in 1999, 2000, and 2006. Venezuela remains a major U.S. trade partner, but is no longer seen by Washington as a reliable ally. In the case of Venezuela, in the case of the European Union and other European countries, Venezuela has generally maintained a modus vivendi in which commercial and economic interests has prevailed above the critical comments regarding the domestic situation and human rights. In the European Parliament and in the European non-governmental level, there has been more discussion and greater absence of consensus on how to define what's happening in my country. As far as inter-American relations, the Venezuelan government has had a controversial stance in opposing U.S. position within the OAS, as well as opposing the role of the regional organization as the guarantor of the democracy in Latin America and the Caribbean, and its promotion of representative democracy within the hemispheric summits. In fact, Caracas has questioned its human rights bodies and the role of observer missions and NGOs in the electoral processes in the region. The government of Venezuela has threatened to withdraw from the OAS on the grounds of the negative assessment it has received, which has been considered by Caracas as a result of pressures on the part of the Venezuelan enemies, especially the U.S. President Hugo Chávez's government has given regional economic and trade integration special attention. For him, integration doesn't merely represent trade alliance, but on the contrary, integration is understood by him as a global issue. In the midterm, integration is viewed on a non-capitalist basis, including the implementation of participatory democracy for the promotion of the economy that combines social, community, and cooperative property models, and the regulation and reduction of private direct foreign investment. That is why it is not surprising that Venezuela proposed the integration scheme known as the Bolivarian Alternative for the People of America, which itself is a different approach to the FTAA and contains agreement and free trade that Washington is undertaking with several governments in the region. As for Venezuela and Cuba, President Chávez has created a favorable special relation between the two countries. In this regard, he has spoken of the need to lift the U.S. blockade, and the Cuban regime has repeatedly stated its opposition to the United States' view of a lack of internal democracy in the island. As a matter of fact, La Habana needs a stable and friendly Venezuela. After the downfall of long-standing authoritarian rulers in Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, President Chávez suggests that the Arab Spring was being fomented by the West, El Imperio, to bring change to Venezuela itself. In the first place, the geopolitical realignment of a country that has sought a new type of bilateral alliances as a result of a position centered on criticism of Western powers and based on the idea of seeking an alternative approach in the current multipolar context. Second, Venezuela has built a network of South-South cooperation relations which highlight a number of oil and ideological mechanisms that ensure its important role not only in Latin America and the Caribbean, but also in Asia and Africa, and also spreading into the US and several European countries. Therefore, President Chávez and his supporters have maintained and expanded political solidarity organizations, social organizations, NGOs, academia, and media who are sympathetic to Caracas and who have received important financial, logistical, and ideological support. The combination of the hard power, given the favorable economic conditions and the country's oil, as well as soft power, given the existence of a major internationalist ideological and propaganda machine, and social power, given the international cooperation programs developed by Venezuela, form and maintain the offer of the 21st century socialism and its ideological package, which is based on a different view has to do with the majority of the region considers are the terms of democracy, development, and foreign policy. The opposition, including both political parties, the anti-government NGOs, and the media, also use the international agenda to influence public debate, and they try to obtain international support. They watch the manner in which the government is handling diplomacy, stating that it is biased and considering that the approaches and objectives are mistaken. At this point, I would like to remind you that there will be two leading candidates in Venezuela 2012 presidential election. On the one hand, President Chávez, who has defined the context and implementation of Venezuelan foreign policy since 1999, and who will try to continue to do so. The other candidate will be the opposition candidate, who will certainly criticize current Venezuelan foreign policy and will offer a different program. My guess is that Venezuelan voters support the opposition candidate. The country's foreign policy will be quite different. He or she will face demanding challenges in order to, first, evaluate the Chavismo foreign policy in terms of its alliance, vocabulary, worldviews, and outcomes. Secondly, assess Venezuelan foreign policy in terms of screening the commitment which has been made during the past 12 years, especially regarding military, political, economic, and trade issues. Third, to review current alliances with problematic nations, quotation, Cuba, Iran, Syria, Belarus, Iran, and to return to a moderate foreign policy in terms of the relation with the United States, Latin American nations, the European Union, and also Israel. To review the integration in schemes and the ideological trends such as ALBA and international cooperation policy. Fifth, to open the door to the return to office of career diplomats that were expelled or were marginalized in the diplomatic service in order to reveal a diplomatic professional system. Sixth, to change the so-called revolutionary outlook, views, and approaches of our diplomacy to reorient it. Seventh, to open the door to direct and private foreign investment. In fact, it is my opinion that Venezuela deserves to be a normal country, democratic, moderate, pro-Western, with development and with freedom. As a conclusion, we come up with three scenarios for the next year elections regarding foreign policy. First, if Chavez wins, both Venezuelan domestic politics and foreign policy will continue on the path traced since its inception in 1999. Revolutionary situation, 21st century socialism, communal power, promoting the ideological package, anti-capitalist international alliances, and a radical anti-American foreign policy, and the temptation to support the revolution. Secondly, that a new Chavez administration could reduce the ideological profile of the foreign policy in favor of a more pragmatic behavior by the very fact of the current limitations for putting the aims and objectives of Venezuelan foreign policy in practice. This will mean cooperation and incentive for the international community with Venezuela in order to promote a stronger opposition and a dialogue with the government. Third, that the combination of changing domestic and external environment contrary to the revolution could force Venezuela to review its international profile, which will mean a help from the international community for the reconstruction effort led by a new president, a new government with a different international program. In any of these scenarios, both regional and world governments and other international actors, we have to check the actions of a country with an active foreign policy, which is, however, developing a non-conventional path which seems to envision a country with less democracy and less market-oriented economy. Finally, can Venezuela opposition reverse the current authoritarian trend in order to redefine our national interests and to participate in the formulation of a new foreign policy agenda. Can Venezuelan foreign agenda change? I don't know. I don't really know, perhaps. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank our three panelists for three excellent and very informative presentations. We now have a short period for questions. We can take them sequentially one by one. Open up. Yes, sir.
I wonder if, to what extent have you factored in the impact of social media and the young people in facilitating the progress? Just, in the way that they're connected through internet and what have you, in ways that perhaps they were in the Arab Spring.
I mean, this is an electoral scenario, so all parties are trying to use the best they can the new media. I mean, now, for example, within the opposition primaries, the leading candidates are using intensively the new media, particularly, well, all of them really, particularly Twitter, but they are using all the media they can really get their hands on to try to win. So in that sense, yes, really, this will be a factor. I mean, the effectiveness of the use of the new media is going to be a factor, particularly regarding the youth. Yeah.
Yes, I had one comment to Mr. Monaldi that I wanted to mention, and then I have a question. One factor for the petroleum growth is also personnel, and the professionalism of the Venezuelan industry has suffered dramatically, and that will be a big factor. Now, talking about the future politics to Mr. Molina Vega, there are two things that haven't been mentioned. One is electoral fraud in Venezuela, and the other one is what position is the military going to take after the elections? There seems to be a lot of political influence these days into the military, and what do you think is going to be their reaction to whatever happens, especially if the opposition wins?
Francisco.
Yeah. Yes, I completely agree with you. I mean, and there is a shortage in the world of qualified people in the oil industry. So the decline of the PDVSA is a big problem. Of course, we have huge human resources outside of Venezuela. Maybe some can come back. Maybe not all to PDVSA, but some to private contractors. And on the other hand, I think it's important to notice that the current legal regime, it's open to foreign investment, and in fact, there are deals with foreign companies, as I mentioned, that I think, in that sense, we are in a better situation that we were, say, after nationalization of '76, in which we couldn't do anything without anything with private participation, and so even though I think it will be really difficult, and I think there are some flexibility to be added to the fiscal framework, I think the opportunities are significant, even though the challenges, as you point out, are great.
Yeah. Well, yes. First, electoral fraud. It depends how you define electoral fraud. Electoral fraud that is usually understood really will not be a factor. I mean, votes are fairly counted. The electronic process of voting have worked well, is highly audited by the opposition. So at this point in time, one could say that votes that are cast will be counted. I mean, the problem will not be there, have not been there, actually, in Venezuela, and that is why the opposition have taken the electoral path, I would say, successfully and united. But if you count the use of public resources to get electoral advantage, fraud, well, certainly that is a factor. It's a factor that is counted in by the opposition. They are working with that. They know the government will have that very, very big advantage. They have won elections against that advantage, and they will try to do that again. But certainly the government will use is doing it every day. I mean, will carry on using electoral resources for their electoral purposes. And regarding the military, my guess is that the military has accommodated with Chavez. They will accommodate with an opposition win. That is the most likely scenario. Of course, there will always be a factor. There will be policies towards them, but it's very likely that they will accommodate. They won't go frontally against a vote for the opposition. They won't try to establish in Venezuela a traditional military dictatorship as we have had in South America. I don't think that is a likely scenario. You never can tell. But I think they will accommodate with with an opposition president.
Thank you. Right there.
Yes, sir. Sometimes we Venezuelans, don't look straight and don't say what is really going on in this country. For example, your question about the military. The military have been announcing first President Chavez and later his high command in the last 3 or 4 months that they will not recognize any supreme commander of the armed forces different from Mr. Chavez. It's just a clear signal that they are preparing a coup and they are preparing to not accept a new president. That's absolutely clear. And I don't know, if you read all the public declaration of the military, the top military ranks in Venezuela, that's the conclusion any intelligence analyst will conclude. Second, saying that we are living a very particular situation. For the first time in the last 50 years in Venezuela, the militaries have come out in the open supporting a political party. And I want an answer for that. And second, not only that, but that military top-ranking officers are the ones handling and directing narco-traffic in Venezuela. Are the people on front of narco-traffic in Venezuela. So they have a lot at risk if the opposition wins the election. And my fear is, and I wish I am wrong, first of all, in any scenario, the first thing that we have to take into account is, are there going to be elections next year? That's the first question. What are the chances that we will arrive to a legal and regular election next year? Are the military going to allow the opposition defeat Chavez and go out of government and risk being submitted to a trial for narco trafficking or taken to the international court? That's another question.
So can I let them answer those two questions? Okay. So for the two questions, one on the elections, one on the military. Jose Enrique, I believe you touched on the military already.
I think, that question has been asked before any elections since now. The opposition won the referendum in 2007. They got a sizable representation in the National Assembly, and before each election the same question is asked. So I think if one follows what has happened until now, the answer have to be yes. There will be elections next year. There is nothing in the situation that allows one to reach a different conclusion, I think. And for the military, I mean, in 2001, there was, do you remember the name of this general that was riding a tank? Exactly. I mean, you know, Rosendo, I don't need to carry on saying anything. I mean, you know, Rosendo was, I mean, a big fan of Chavez. I mean, the main support of Chavez. I mean, and he was the one that told Chavez to go out, I mean, to surrender in 2002. I mean, the military accommodates. And in the current Venezuela situation, I think it will be enormously risky for the military to try to go against a vote, against the popular will. I mean, for the experience in the recent experience, I suppose, in Venezuela and in other countries, I mean, they know that the chances of success for any kind of military government in the medium run are very, very slender, and the chances that they will be subject of trials, imprisonment, probably not in 5 years, but in 10, 20 years, are very high. I mean, and they know that as well. I don't think we are in a situation in which the military could try to go against vote for the opposition. So I carry on saying, I mean, I still say that they will accommodate. I think they will accommodate to a new kind of government. That won't be easy. They will be, of course, negotiations with the military, as they were negotiations in Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay. And of course, in this case, it's not the same situation in those countries. And at the end, the new government will be able to stabilize.
Yes, thanks.
And there, and there, we have to. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for Professor Monaldi, and it's two questions related to oil. The first one goes with the rigs. You mentioned the operative rig that we have is around, I think that you mentioned 68, and should be around 100. So there is a big gap in terms of the rigs that we need to increase our production. Well, the concern of the rigs is, what is your point of view of the rigs that are damaged, that maybe because of the lack of investment, we will not be able to, or the government won't be able to put it back, for production? That's one question about the rigs. And the other question is the concern about all the contracts the agreement that we have with China. We are sending oil for cash, and we have a huge debt in PDVSA right now because of that. And there is a lot of concern about the scope of those agreements, and also the issue of course, the risk of the resources, because we have some kind of resources that are connected to those agreements. So could you please mention what you know about those agreements? You can expand that idea on the rigs.
Okay. Well, the issue of the rigs is that, I mean, in order to increase oil production, we had in the late 90s, when we were increasing production, about 120 active oil rigs. Of course, I mean, it depends on the type of field. It depends on the efficiency of the use of the rigs. I mean, there are a lot of variables, but what is clear is that the number of oil rigs that are active now are not enough to sustain and increase in production, but barely to keep a slow decline. So the reason why the cost of oil rigs has increased dramatically in the international markets, but the main reason is that PDVSA is not investing enough. I mean, despite there are also issues of human resource capacity. There are a variety of other issues, the nationalization of oil contractors, etc. But the main issue is that the amount of money that PDVSA is investing in the issue that we should be investing, which is exploration and production, mostly production, is not enough. In terms of the oil deal with China, there is a lot of misinformation on this issue because, as usual, the government is non-transparent at all. We very recently, this week, Miguel Ángel Rodríguez, a deputy, published a punto de cuenta memo to the president by Minister Ramirez, asking the president to give PDVSA a little bit more money because of the strain that the China deal is doing to PDVSA. At this point, the basic things we know is that from next year on, PDVSA has to send 420,000 barrels of oil to China, and that each payment is 420 times a price of $50. And anything, we don't know exactly how it's calculated, the real price that it's paid, but anything above the $50 goes to a surplus account. So PDVSA, first of all, this is not money that the loans, I mean, there was first a $5 billion loan, then another $5 billion loan, and now a $20 billion fund. By the way, not all of that has been disbursed, only the first $5 billion and a little bit of the second $5. So it's not like we already have all that debt, but of course the president is very able to spend money very quickly, in arms deals and things like that. On the other hand, the problem is that PDVSA is not receiving the money; it's the government, right? And the government is not using it for oil at this point. So PDVSA has not only to send the oil and not receive the money, but it has to pay the royalty. and it was not supposed to be the case, but that's what's happening now. So PDVSA is being charged twice. It's basically an additional tax to PDVSA. Moreover, this excedentary account in which the surplus above 50 is getting into has been used to save CBG, the CBG, the Guayana sector, which is broke. So PDVSA is not receiving that money either. And the memo to the president was asking that at least that money was sent back to PDVSA. So PDVSA is in a big strain. It's an electoral year. The president will keep getting the money out. In terms of the long-term issue, I mean, I don't think if the terms are right and there is transparency inside the country and the money is not used like a piggy bank for the president, a loan from China is not necessarily a bad idea. The Chileans are using the same thing with copper. But of course, the big if is that if that money is well used, transparently used, for example, if it's used for the Orinoco Belt, if the 20 billions are used to finance the PDVSA part of the Orinoco Belt, I think that could be a great deal. But currently, what we have is to send 20,000 barrels to China, and production is declining. So it's a larger and larger share of total exports. No? I mean, if you assume that we are exporting about 2 million or from 1.7 to 2 million barrels, about 25% of our exports are going to be sent to China and not receive very little payment because already the government received the money. So we are burdening our future. But if we use that money to increase production, then it's a very different deal. I mean, we could have a production of 4.5 billion barrels eventually, 4.5 million barrels per day, and 500,000 barrels going to China will not be a big deal.
Okay. Well, assuming that Enrique Capriles Radonsky is going to be probably, or maybe Pablo Perez is going to be probably the opposition candidate, what would you think is going to be the main key to defeat Hugo Chavez on 2000 election? Because Enrique Capriles is not a charismatic guy, as you know. So, what do you think is going to be the main key to defeat Hugo Chavez?
To anyone or? Well, just briefly, I think. I mean, Capriles has one very good thing. He has a good record on Miranda in terms of social policy, which is supposedly to be the Chavez strength. No, so he could, I think, credibly claim that he can use the money better than Chavez because the health system in Miranda is working better than the central government health system. And so that will be a strong point. I think that it would be very difficult to defeat Chavez, but I think that will be sort of the argument of Capriles. In the case of Pablo Perez, I think similarly what we will, both of these candidates, which are the leading candidates, are not telling Venezuela that they are going to completely change. They basically are focusing on they will do a better social policy, they will work with the private sector, and so today the population believes that the economic model is not working, and so people are willing to hear these options. The problem is that if all this money gets into the economy during the next year, and people are having so much money that they forget sort of the problems of the economy, it might not be enough. But I think the approach of Pablo Perez and Enrique Capriles is correct in terms of a strategy for winning the election.
Yeah, I would like to add that there is a very important discussion in the Capriles and Perez organizations about that issue that you raised up. The discussion is simple. Where the democratic items, democratic issues command the campaign, or they're going to be the economic ones. So far, the economic ones has been on the table. If you look at the campaign of the pre-candidate Capriles and the pre-candidate Pablo Perez, there are not some issues related with the democracy and human rights and this kind of stuff. They say that the most important issues of the poor people in Venezuela now are related with the economy, and they are not related with the political ones, because those are considered only by the middle class. I disagree with that. I think that as soon you're going to resemble Chavez, the rational vote will choose by Chavez, because they want to duplicate another Chavez who, by the way, are not running as a president. Chavez has a record, and for the people, for the poor people, it will be better to vote for him than to vote for Capriles and Perez. But in any case, then I want to sustain and to stress it as a very important discussion inside the campaign.
Okay, I have just time for one more question.
Yes, I have one question to Professor Romero and one question to Dr. Ronaldi. To Dr. Romero, in the scenario of the opposition winning the election, what will happen in terms of the Venezuela membership on OPEC? Do you think that we will remain as committed to OPEC as we have been during the Chavez regime, or we will go to the other way? No. Now, to Dr. Monaldi, also in the same scenario of the opposition party winning the election, what will become of PDVSA? Is there any chance that PDVSA will be privatized in any manner? What will be the most likely scenario for PDVSA in the framework of the opposition win?
Yes. Okay, if the candidate of the opposition win the election, the first thing that have to do with OPEC is to stay in the OPEC. Don't forget that Venezuela has been losing power and importance inside OPEC for three reasons. First, because Venezuela is trying to politicize the OPEC in terms of the support to Gaddafi and the support to the dictator of Syria, and has been confronted by another governments which disagree with that point of view. Secondly, in terms of the policy of prices and production, there is another scale between Venezuela and other countries in OPEC. And finally, there is a new thing, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, that Chavez has been suggesting to create another kind of oil countries organization, which is called by him the superpowers. I don't know what the superpowers mean, but it is related with the two issues that I mentioned before. So in order to repair our membership and in order to repair our role in the OPEC, we have to come back to the historical position that we have inside to promote the role of the oil producers countries in the world, no more than that. And that's why I will say that certainly we have to stay in OPEC.
Okay, I mean, just a comment on the OPEC issue. I agree with Carlos that, I mean, not only in terms of what we should do, but what actually a potential presidency of Capriles or Perez will do. I believe that they will stay in OPEC, and but of course they will have a different alliances in OPEC, no? Because now Chavez is allied basically with Iran, and it was allied with Libya. Now there will be some changes in the way Venezuela works inside OPEC. But my impression is that they will be very cautious in making big changes on oil policy. And one of these big changes is OPEC. Of course, both candidates have mentioned very significant goals in terms of increasing oil production, and that will generate big tensions with OPEC, depending, of course, on how the world oil market is developing. No, if consumption in China grows very quickly, the tensions might not be as high. But if the market is weak, tensions will be high if Venezuela is investing. The same goes for the other issue, the one you mentioned. I don't think nobody will privatize PDVSA in the foreseeable future, but I think they will take advantage that the current regime has this big opportunity for private investment. No, 40% of any project in Venezuela could be owned by a private company of any oil project. And I think what they might think about doing is not only extend that, which, by the way, the government has systematically said that they will do. This government, no? They say that they will give conventional oil fields to China, to India. So there is a lot of space. But the other thing that I think the opposition will do is probably open to investment by Venezuelans more significantly. Maybe use the capital markets of Venezuela to develop that, and to have a population being stockholders of the projects. But I don't think nobody has going to. I mean, not even Maria Corina Machado has said, which is sort of the most private, the most willing to open to private investment in the oil sector. None of the candidates has said that they will touch the PDVSA. You know, that's a constitutional issue, by the way. You have to change the constitution in order to sell shares of PDVSA. Moreover, I don't think it is a priority. I don't think it's necessary. I think there are other ways to work. And one of the things that I think is important, Venezuela should not go to the extremes of pendulum, you know, from going private. We have the opportunity with the current framework, with small changes, to have private investment in the oil sector. So I don't think that it's advisable to do a major change in the institutional framework.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you all for being with us here tonight at the Baker Institute, and I'd like to thank our three panelists once again for three excellent presentations.
Thank you.